Merci beaucoup pour cette invitation. Ce soir, je vais m'exprimer en anglais. And I want to pick up something that has been said in the discussion before, twice or three times even. Kostas said it. Oh, first of all, I have to mention that I disagree with Kostas on his whenever you get into something, you have to get out of it. At least it's a question of timing. If you're in the wrong TGV, at least it's not so simple to say, I'm just going out right now. You take some time and some preparation, obviously. But I think we don't disagree on that. But the second point is that you have to be much more specific on what you want to do. You have to communicate what you want to do. And this is a crucial point. The communication with the people, you know. It's not just about economics, and Costa said we all know the economics. Well, some people know them. Very few people, let's say in Europe as a whole, maybe 10% of the people and 50% of the economists. In Germany, 1% of the people and 5% of the economists know what is at stake and what is the right economics. So it's a question of communication, and the communication should not be underestimated because there is a structural problem with communication of a left program. A very deep digging structural problem with communication of a left program. And let me start with the one example is what was made before, where one of the previous speakers said, debt, we just cancel debt. Sure, cancel all Italian debt and all Italian people will be poor. It's not a solution. No? Sometimes it can be a solution to cancel debt. In the case of Greece, if the counterparty, so to say, is mostly governments, other governments, then you should cancel debt, no doubt about it. But if the counterparty is your own people, it doesn't make sense at all to cancel debt. One has to be very careful with these things. And on debt in general, I want to talk a bit about debt. One of the young people had a question, I think, that was quite reasonable. But that's only one of my topics that I wanted to mention. I want to mention three topics. Because what is the structural problem that we're facing? Now, the structural problem is that we are talking against the, so to say, natural prejudice of the people. If we apply the right economics, we so to say, we violate what the people have in their minds from birth to death. Let me give three examples. We talk about wages. Wages and salaries. Every normal worker knows that there's a conflict with wages and jobs, between wages and jobs. There's a trade-off. Every normal worker knows that. Because he, in his company, he faces every day the situation that the managers all tell them, if you increase your wages, your jobs will be gone. And it's right, huh? It's true. At the micro level, it's true. So this is the prejudice that people have. If the left says, the wages have to rise all the time, well, it may be not even convincing to the workers. So what you need in this case, very explicitly, you need a different economic theory. And you have to communicate this different economic theory. You cannot just say, let's increase wages. When we take power, we increase wages, everything will be fine. No, nothing will be fine. It will be a disaster. It will even be a disaster with your own people. And let us imagine you get into a situation where Monsieur Mitterrand was in the beginning of the 80s, where he ran quickly with higher wages into a huge current account deficit, and he didn't know how to handle that, and the situation was indeed difficult to handle. Then the left will be gone after a couple of days, so to say, in power. So you shouldn't be naive on that. You have to think about wages. Wages are very important, are the most important thing. But to convince people about wages and reasonable wage increases, you need a different economic theory. You have to teach the people first that increasing wages in a reasonable way, not wages 10, 20% every year, in a reasonable way is the only way to keep full employment. So it's just the other way around as the neoliberal or neoclassical theory tells you, but you have to teach it to your people because your people's natural understanding, so to say, is the other way around. My second example is competition. Everybody thinks, well, competition is a normal thing. You grow up with the idea that competition in sports and wherever you go is a wonderful thing. It's a good thing. So then when you get adult, someone tells you, oh, there's competition of nations. And everybody would say, yes, why shouldn't there be competition of nations? We compete with the French, the Germans compete with the French, and the French compete with the Italians. It's a good idea. Or? So for 30 years now, our people have learned that competition is the best thing under the sun. And competition, micro and macro, is more or less the same. If you say we close our borders, we don't want to trade with anyone anymore, people will not understand what you're talking about. And the same thing, and very closely connected to that, is that people have learned that trade is the best thing under the sun. Trade is extremely important because trade is the only thing that brings about wealth, that creates wealth. Trade is the only thing. Because this is the traditional economic theory. And if you want to emancipate from that, if you want to communicate something different, you have to teach a different economic theory, namely a theory that there is something inherently in an economic system that can produce growth and can produce jobs, and that is not trade. It's a totally different theory. And if you want to talk about competition, you have to teach the people that competition of nations is a totally different beast than competition of companies among each other. It's a totally different thing. Because one nation cannot push another nation out of the market. If you would have taught that the Germans 50 years ago, they would understand now that it's foolish to talk about, so to say, competing with France and beating France in the end and being the winner in the competition with France. There is no winner in macroeconomic terms. And my last topic is even more important. I'm coming back to debt. Everybody grows up with the idea that debt is a bad thing. Huh? Debt is bad. And if you tell them the first thing that we do, I said it already, we default on our debt, you just confirm this prejudice that debt is bad. Debt is bad, sure, no doubt about it. No, debt is not bad at all. There's nothing bad with debt, nothing. And even 120% what Italy has, or even 190% of Greece, is in principle no problem. It's just a problem because we have a theory that creates a problem out of such a debt ratio. To show debt in an economy, I have here the example of France. Debt is always the counterpart of savings. I don't want to explain that now in detail, but take it as it is, and as it is on this chart, there is always a counterpart for savings that is called debt. There is no debt without savings and no savings without debt. This is an accounting identity. It's not a theory. It cannot be discussed. It's ridiculous to discuss it. But in the Western world, including France and Germany, we're not able to communicate this simple relationship. We're not able to communicate it. Huh? Our politicians in Germany in particular, but elsewhere I think it's exactly the same, they're not willing to talk about it because it's too technical for them. Too technical for them to tell the people, if you save a certain portion of your income, you see like the private households here, the blue line, if you save a portion of your income, then other people have to take on exactly as much debt so that the economy is not falling apart in a minute. Yeah, that's extremely important. Because, you see, France is a funny country. In France, foreign countries are saving for France, so to say. That's Germany. Germany is giving its savings to France, which is called the current account surplus in Germany, and a deficit in France. You see, that's foreign countries. Oh, it's in German, unfortunately, the Ausland, foreign countries. And then you have in France, you have the company sector that is still a little creditor on the creditor side. But the big debtor on the debtor side, sorry. But the big debtor, who's the big debtor in France? The government. So if people say the government should reduce debt, the logic is very simple. The logic is then France has either to move Germany into a different position, namely to bring the current account deficit down so that Germany takes on the deficit in the current account, which is not so simple because there's a huge gap in competitiveness, which is not France's fault, but Germany's fault. It was mentioned already. And the other possibility is to bring the company sector further down into debt. But that's also very difficult. Nobody has tried it in the world. I will give you one last example in a minute. So the private households to move from the net saver position into a debtor position is more or less impossible. That nobody has even thought ever about it. Not only not tried, but not thought about. So for France, the situation is now very simple. It cannot move its economy at all, at all. All the nonsense that is told about structural reforms and so on is all, forget about it. It's all plain nonsense. It cannot move its economy without widening the government debt, without taking on more government debt. Absolutely logical. There's no way to stimulate that economy. So, what are we talking about? Are we talking about that explicitly? Are we communicating that to the people? I can tell you from Germany, no. Nobody is ever talking about that relationship. Nobody. So you see, this is in the United States. The situation is even more interesting. In the United States, all sectors except the government are net savers. Oh, wonderful. Everybody is a net saver, you see. But then it's obviously clear there must be a net debtor. And it can only be the government. So what will Mr. Trump do? Not because he's Mr. Trump and not because he's a right-wing radical. No, because there is no alternative. He will stimulate the economy through more debt. And then we will, as has been said before, I think Stefan Fassina said it rightly, so you will see that the conservatives are doing exactly the kind of policies that the social democrats and the left are shying away from. And they're not explicitly saying it. But you should not just say we're stimulating the economy. No, you should say it is absolutely unavoidable that we stimulate the economy through the government sector because there's no way out. That's a different thing, you see. It's a different kind of communication. You see, Germany has solved the problem. In Germany, all sectors, including the government, are net savers. It's wonderful, huh? And all the others out there, including France, the idiots out there are debtors, huh? And we tell them, oh, you are the bad guys because you have taken on the debt. And what are the people telling the Germans? Oh, we want to become like you, Germany. Monsieur Fillon is just saying it. We want to become like Germany, but Monsieur Hollande also said it. We want to change in a way that we move in the German direction. Has anyone in France ever said it's impossible? It's absolutely impossible. It's logically impossible? I think no. Even the left hasn't said it. But that is exactly what you say, what you should communicate to the rest of the world. It's absolutely impossible. It's impossible because Germany is blocking the way for all the normal countries to become normal countries in a way that they grow again and have not only the solution like Italy to go into recession. What Italy has done in this conflict, there's one way out. And that is the way France could also go. You create a current account surplus. But how can you create a current account surplus if you're not competitive and you do not want to cut your wages by 30%, because then you would be more competitive, price competitive than Germany. If you don't want to do that because you saw that it's a disaster if you do it in Greece and Spain and Portugal, if you don't want to do that, what is the alternative? Well, you create a recession. You create a recession for 6 years, and then your imports are falling, and then you have a current account surplus, and that is the way out. Huh? Wonderful. We all know that's no way out. So the only option an Italian government has is, if it follows the European rules, is to create deeper recession and create a larger current account surplus. But we all know that for Europe it is not a solution at all. And these things we have to face. And these things we do not just have to face, but we have to communicate it, as I said. We have to speak openly about these needs, about the necessities, about the unavoidable logical consequences of the German current account surplus. Thank you very much.